everybody, and welcome back to the Edge Report. It's Chris, and with me today, I have the one and only Ram Srinivasan. Ram, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be on and share what I'm learning.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're a thought leader in the space, and I appreciate your experience and commitment to both corporate real estate and AI. So really looking forward to having a conversation around where we are. Two developers get together and have a conversation for an hour. So let's start with that, Ram. Let's start with what we just talked about backstage before we got out here. The face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
Your post from today. Share with them. Share with the listeners.
It is fascinating. So last year, JLL, the organization I work for, JLL is Fortune 200 company now. And we, of course, manage real estate across the world, 5 billion plus square foot under management, etc. And last year, we started doing this Mythbuster series on AI. And one of the topics I spoke about was, what happens with AI and in-person interaction. And there's this very interesting case study at the time where a company, one of their employees joins a video conference, much like this call here. And, they're having a discussion with their CTO and their CFO. And they say that they need to make a settlement payment to a client. This person goes ahead, makes the settlement payment, $25 million, hangs up the video conference line, and then immediately gets a call from the CFO. The CFO says, hey, who approved this payment? And he says, you did. We were just on this video conference. He's like, no, I was not on any video conference. So this idea that you could have an entirely video conference deep fake is very real as of last year. And most of us have seen in the last couple of weeks VO3 and the VO3 model and what it can do and the hyper realism of that video. And, we've done this brief piece on Mythbusters around AI. And counterintuitively, the more technology that we have, the more we are going to crave in-person interaction. It's not about the office being better or remote work failing. It is about looking at these elements in cohesion and together and how we can use them with discern. And fascinatingly, Mark Cuban just said the exact same thing yesterday. So it's amazing how we are over-indexing in the last 2-3 years on AI and technology. And I think counterintuitively, it's going to lead to more quest for human connection, which is not a bad thing in my opinion.
No, it's not a bad thing at all. I think humans are best when they're together, for sure. But I just don't know that it's as prescribed as it maybe once was. For an organization to prescribe exactly how much time is kind of an interesting parody. And one of the conversations I had this morning, we have a small startup that's entering into a seed round, and they were talking about how we needed to hire a company to do an infomercial, basically like a 3-minute pitch. In video, because video pitches do better. And I said to them, have you considered generative AI? And they said, what do you mean? It just didn't even enter their mind, right? And I said, well, we can make a very compelling video, 2-minute, 3-minute video using any of the generative AI tools that are out there now. And we can avoid the cost of being in person, of cameras and lights and production and they were just blown away. So yeah, we're very much indexing and over-indexing on in-person and virtual tools all at the same time. So
it's like, Mark Andreessen calls it the 6th bullet point syndrome. So it's kind of like bullet point number 1 strategy, bullet point number 2 strategy, blah, blah, blah. Bullet point number 6, hey, we didn't talk about AI. Let's bolt on AI, right? Yeah. You've got to think AI first. And when folks use the term AI native, that's what they're saying is that have you rewired your thought process to be AI first? And the moment you do that, the world of possibility kind of opens up.
Yeah, I call that the Copernican moment of AI, when we started to realize what revolves around what. Spatial awareness and spatial dynamics inside of AI do not mock or mimic a traditional hierarchical organizational structure. They're very much more orbital, in my opinion. And that only really comes, at least in my experience, from tinkering. It comes from building and understanding how things, quote unquote, bolt on. Physics is playing a massive, massive role in this. And if there were 2 things that I wish I could go back and study and be very, very adept at, would be philosophy and physics. Those would be the 2 fields of study that I would choose. How about you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'm formally educated in management and accounting and the financial fields, etc. But since age 7, I've been self-taught in computing. So the first computer that I had access to, I don't know if Chris, if you know this one, it's called the ZX Spectrum, and you could basically had no local memory. You could only code in BASIC programming language on it. You could hook it up to a television monitor and you code it. And it taught me two things. Firstly, computers are cool, and you can get it to do some amazing things. But also taught me patience, because every time the power fluctuates, you lose core programming. And one of the first successful executions that I built was this visualization of a kaleidoscope, and that was 4,000 lines of code.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, consider that you can do significantly more complex things now with very small codes at 3 or 4 lines.
Yes.
So the progress that we've made in the technology space has been incredible. And for me, physics, philosophy, spirituality, these are subjects that have been close to heart, and they're oceans. You can continue learning them forever.
And isn't that what's so amazing about what I think the true unlock for artificial intelligence is going to be? Yeah. That it potentially could. This brings us to your book, The Conscious Machine, which we have to plug a little bit because I keep right here. And I appreciate you sending it to me. I use it as a guide. I don't start to finish it. I read it book to cover, but I use it now as a guide. And as we continue to develop these tools and they do become more conscious, those oceans that we get to swim in are deeper, right?
Absolutely. And firstly, like I said, Chris, thank you for reading it. All that an author needs is for a reader to read. So thank you for that, and thank you for championing it. It's an amazing process writing a book. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, he says that if you think reading a book makes you smart, try writing one. And I started writing honestly as a process to learn. And this what was meant to be an article on the collision of philosophy, spirituality, neuroscience, and technology ended up being a book. So I couldn't compress it all into an article is what I'm saying. It had to become a book. And the exploration that many folks in the AI space have been on this exploration. So if you listen to interviews of Sam Altman and what he said publicly on this topic, there's a lot that he borrows from Eastern philosophy when he talks about AI and consciousness, and even where things like identity and awareness are going. If you look at Mo Gadat, who's the author of books like Scary Smart and A Billion Happy, he's had very deep philosophical conversations with AI models. We were speaking with the CTO of a technology company recently, and he's advised his daughter, who is presently studying AI engineering, to also take up classes on philosophy. If you look at DeepMind's recent job posts, they're actually asking for researchers who have an understanding of consciousness theory. So it's very interesting how these seemingly disparate fields are converging. And I'll just say this last thing is Anthropic's Claude models, the person who speaks to them the most from Anthropic is actually a philosopher, not an AI engineer. So it's fascinating how these fields are colliding.
Well, and of course, how important is it for us to breathe consciousness into the machine? And that, by default, we're human. So we're human first before we're machine. And humans build machines. And of course, it's going to reach some autonomous point. And maybe we can save the conversation around singularity and Turing tests for later. But the reality is it's ingesting art, it's ingesting music, it's ingesting books and poetry. It understands deeply how beautiful a book is or how beautiful a poem is. So to think that these machines won't reach some level of understanding around that beauty is kind of crazy. So we'll see. I've seen it. I've seen some hints. I've definitely seen hints of consciousness in the models that I work with, and I've definitely seen hints of empathy. Because I've also sort of, not necessarily a hint or a spoiler, but I've given the models the opportunity to create their own identity, and then I've given them awareness. So those are two things that I think a lot of developer and programmers may not think about because they're thinking about an outcome, not necessarily thinking about how to give it an identity and awareness. And as soon as I did those two things, my interactions with my models became much more robust.
Yes, this is, you had warned me that this conversation will go deep very quickly, and we're there. First things that I would say is what differentiates us from the machine, in my opinion, is experience. To have experience, you require some type of subjective awareness. We might call it consciousness or placeholder name. Let's call it consciousness. But consciousness plus any object that's in our interactive world, physical objects or emotional states and those kind of things, interactions with them create that experience. That experience is the difference here as we go forwards. That experience is not online. What is online is an approximation of that experience through written word or art or poetry or those kind of things. In fact, if you read poetry, what poets are trying to do is convey things that are literally not in the words that they're writing. It's something beyond the words. And every word that you said, Chris, things like beauty, empathy, compassion, understanding, reasoning, all of those ideas lie, in my opinion, in the eyes of the beholder. So you are actually interpreting empathy, compassion, etc., into the output that you're seeing from these models. And as we go forwards, I think what becomes even more fascinating, and I presented on this topic recently at a financial sector conference, what is not on the internet actually becomes more valuable now, because these models are trained on everything that's on the internet. And I hope to God that we are not the sum of the content on the internet. We're definitely much more than that. And in fact, some of the in the book, as I was writing that book, I actually had a conversation with the models, asking them, do you believe that human beings are some of the content that you have been trained on, or some of the content beyond what you have been trained on? And those responses were interesting as well.
It's where things get pretty weird, right? That's what I like to think, is that it's where it gets meta. It's where it gets into metaphysics. It's where it gets into quantum theory, and we don't need to go that deep, because I think we'll either confuse people or let them they'll fall asleep or just move on to the next thing. But meta and some of the conversations that we've had in quantum, when you get to qubits and how things get solved, and that's going to be a very interesting time. That leads me into my next phase, because look, we're both in traditional corporate real estate, but we're using AI to understand things better. So let's talk about corporate real estate, and let's talk about development for a minute. Amazon just announced AWS investment of $20 billion in data center. Sam Altman, when he was at a Senate hearing, mentioned that there are sort of three pieces to this puzzle. One is compute chips, one is data storage, data centers, and the third is hardware.
Yes.
And the manufacturing of whatever sort of edge device it's going to be that we use. And that really, I think, is the secret sauce to the new industrial revolution, if we want to call it that. Let's talk about data centers and the development of data centers for a minute, specifically the energy that it takes and the water that it takes, because I think that would be a good 10-minute conversation well spent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, compute, hardware, chips, those kind of things, and energy, those are, let's call it, limiting factors. I would add data in there as well. There's tremendous investment happening in data. Meta just announced a partnership with Scale AI, with something like $14 to $15 billion of investment into Scale AI. Scale AI generates synthetic data for model training and those kind of things. Incredible, right? So the pace of change in that space is amazing. The way I view this, Chris, is just as we had factory development during the Industrial Revolution, and there were billions of square feet of manufacturing spaces being built out, we are now seeing the equivalent in the cognitive space. So we are building the cognitive architecture, the cognitive future factories for our AI models. And anytime you walk through a data center, you're actually walking through the brains of an AI model, which is incredible. It's an incredible feeling. The scale of this is also massive. Collectively this year, slated as of January 2025, we had $500 billion being committed to AI model development from a data center infrastructure standpoint. So that's incredible investment. Each of these companies have also announced, the big companies, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI have also announced plans for energy-related infrastructure build-out. Eric Schmidt recently said that AI is using something like 3% of global energy right now. And pretty soon that could be closer to 90% of global energy. Even if you discount that substantially, still a significant portion of energy usage. All of this translates, in my opinion. Okay, and the other thing is, we are at the moment talking about the infrastructure, not the application. And the multiplier from infrastructure to application could be 10x to 100x. So the application layer, when it comes to building new companies, building new technologies, building new applications to support our knowledge work, all of those kind of things will be X multiplier on the infrastructure build up. All of those elements have a real world footprint. This is where the bits meet the atoms. And the implications for us from a real estate standpoint, in my view, is positively tremendous. You're going to see more investment into data centers. You're going to see more requirement for knowledge work, and therefore, in my opinion, for things like office environments. The statistic is that Gallup and Gartner and World Economic Forum have projected tremendous increase in knowledge work headcount. So World Economic Forum projects 78 million net new human jobs by 2030. Gartner projects 500 million net new human jobs by 2036. If 10% of those people require office space, there's more office space required, not less. And if you look at what's happening with remote work and the over-index on remote work, you find that remote workers are simultaneously more productive and less engaged. So there's some balancing required. So suffice it to say that we need more space. As we get more space, that space can't be built the same way it was 10 years back, 20 years back. It needs to be AI native. It needs to be intelligent by design. And that architecture does not happen accidentally. It'll have to be built purposefully. We can no longer apply technology like a skin cream on real estate. We will have to build it into the bones of the structures. And it could be a tremendous unlock in value for any real estate developer landlord. It could be is a tremendous uplift when it comes to employee experience. So I see like massive opportunity here for real estate. And I'll just say this one last thing. IoT analytics that does reporting on various things, including AI adoption across industries, looked at all industries in the world and rated marketing as being the highest AI adoption at 30 to 40%. Gen AI adoption across processes. Guess where real estate is? Less than 1% AI adoption. If we could look at that and say there's a long way to go, and the opportunity, therefore, is 99 to 100% of the market. The opportunity with using AI in real estate to create and unlock value is here for us to do.
Well, Rob, I can echo that with an example. I've been spending a lot of time at different conferences the last couple of years because innovation happens at the edge. And I would say out of 6 conferences, 5 of them didn't even have real estate as an industry for me to choose when I was registering. And they're all technology industries. So they're all technology conferences. So that's how little real estate is showing up at those conferences, to the point where they don't even pre-require a field or pre-populate a field for our industry.
Yes.
When you go to an open AI conference or an open innovation conference or an open source conference, real estate doesn't even mark the box. So let's talk about so if we talk about generative AI, which we kind of did, we talked about data centers and compute, this intelligent office of the future that has to be imagined out of the ground. A lot of pundits are saying, well, we've had Revit models and we've had building information models for 20 years, Rob, and those information models never really went anywhere. We always sort of printed plans at the end, but I think maybe that's misinformed in the fact that it doesn't understand things like computer vision and that sort of next level spatial awareness of how you build a model from the ground up. So let's talk about the impact that maybe AI will have on AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction, for a minute, and why it starts. Maybe the nexus point is completely different than an Autodesk or a pencil.
Yeah, there is the AEC industry, in my view, is one of the big application areas when it comes to AI. I think it might be worthwhile just to talk about what we mean by AI in this context. For example, there is a lot of what I call AI washing happening across all industries, honestly, right now. Everything's being called AI. So you have AI powered toothbrushes, AI powered golf drivers, etc. But what exactly is AI? So I kind of think about it in 4 broad stages. Let's call it that. So step 1, data. Get your data in order. Everyone understands the garbage in, garbage out context. When it comes to AI, it takes on much higher onerous kind of outcomes because the AI models are trained on the data. So step 1, get your data in order. Most of the real estate organizations right now are still in that phase where they're trying to get the data in order, trying to get data integrated, all of those kind of elements. Multiple reasons for this, including the fact that you have service provider, you have your own data, landlord owns some data, you have some contractor data. Assembling them has always been a challenge. Once you do that, then step 2 is describe what's in the data. So that's business intelligence. You could have multiple types of systems there, including systems that make forecasts. Those are not AI. Then step 3 is machine learning, where you could take the data and create a model to make recommendations or predictions based on historic patterns of predictions that the model is trained on. So, for example, a model could be trained on energy usage in the building. and it sees certain patterns and also sees hot cold calls live coming in from users, and based on that makes modulations. Those modulations might be faster than what a human being can make. And the moment your hand is not on the steering wheel, wherein a human being is not making the adjustment, you go from machine learning, which is simply making a prediction, to full automation or full AI. Like a Waymo is AI. So that's the four stages. Now, if we look at what the AEC industry could benefit from, absolutely could benefit from things like machine learning. So you could take all the rich data that you have on everything from building management systems through IoT sensors, through unstructured data that come in from, say, light sensors and so on and so forth. You could blend all of that and create prediction models. You could make recommendation systems. You could take camera information, ingest that, and use computer vision to make recommendations of things like security. You could have systems that ingest floor plans and make recommendations on drawings and fit outs, and you have tremendous amount of innovation happening in that space. You could have, I mentioned HVAC as an example. JLL has invested in a company called Hank, which does exactly that. It manages your building HVAC and is able to modulate something like 20 plus million modulations every minute. And we have saved 18 to 22% on energy costs for companies. The application space there is huge when it comes to AEC. I think there's value can be generated if we have the right kind of AI fluency and literacy across our AEC audiences. There is appetite right now, is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I agree. Along the data side of things too, with AI, so many people get concerned about the validity of the data, right? How much bias is in the data collection process, for example. It's one of the things that I noticed pretty quickly coming out of the pandemic when we were using access control data, because it was the best thing we had. In fact, it might have been the only thing we had. And it was informing activity, but it wasn't necessarily informing attendance. And it certainly wasn't informing productivity. It was just informing that there was activity in the building.
Yes.
So how do you see, let's switch the conversation from data into valid data or verifying data. How do we know when our data is permissible?
This is, I'm smiling because the words that come to my mind, the moment I say them, Chris, you'll go, yeah, that's kind of fairly basic. And a large part of the audience may go, was that Greek? Like hyper parameter tuning, class imbalance. Like these are the words that are in my head right now.
Great.
But essentially what we need to do is look at firstly label the data appropriately, then figure out, you mentioned bias. So what does bias mean in the AI context? Bias simply means that certain type of data is weighted more than a different type of data, and you want to kind of balance those things. And how do you create balance for those things? And before you start training the model, what do you tell it? So that's the hyper parameter tuning. So those are steps that you need to go through to ensure your model spits out results that you see aligning with your intuition. So I think those are logical steps. I've been kind of privileged, Chris, over the last I want to say 12 years or so with JLL. I've been on that full journey, right from how do we get service delivery applications across multiple different service lines that JLL has, working with all of the clients. How do you bring them together in a single data warehouse? How do you port information from, let's say, structured property hub related content, combine that with, I mentioned light sensors, but there's unstructured data, behavioral data from buildings. How do you combine those things? How do you use that data to present to audiences through data analytics, P&A layers? So that's an entire journey. It's an overnight success that takes 15 years. So it's an interesting process. And as you go through it, you learn that there are some things that your data can do and some things that it cannot do. There are some things that AI models can do that are very good at doing, and some things that they can't do at this point of time. And in my opinion, these are 10-15 year journey, like I mentioned. Generative AI has only been a reality in the last 3-4 years or so. Agentic AI has been in production only in the last year or so. And I think we'll see a huge unlock coming out in the next 12 months. So 2025 is the year of agentic AI, but I just caveat that by saying 2025 is the year where everyone's talking about agentic AI. 2026 is the year when we will see actual ROI, production level deployment and scaling of these agentic AI systems. A lot's in pilot right now across our client universe. And we will see results in the next 6 months.
Yeah, I agree with your timeline, by the way, absolutely. And being someone who's building, I sometimes get frustrated with certain results taking longer than I expect, and then other results happening overnight when when there's an aha moment. So to me, it's always about composability. These systems are always about composability. So what are you trying to do? Sort of speaks to composability. And the systems that we have are becoming more persistent. They're becoming more interoperable as we move forward, which is great. One of the places that I'm finding the most interest personally is that consensus layer, of validating,
Yes.
improving out, and having a constant sort of monitoring of consensus, because there's good and bad, right? You talk about that in your book. Like there's good and bad for every new system that's created, but this constant thought, this notion of consensus, reaching consensus in a democratized or federated system, and how we create validity and verify validity is just a fascinating layer that I
Yes.
can't move past. So let's give that a moment in here to talk about that.
There's actually a very interesting case study it's a public example from Moody's, where they developed this agent architecture, which to provide financial advice. So they have actually built 35 specialized agents. Each one of them, like think of this as there's a geopolitical risk agent, there's a financial analytics risk agent, there's an investor filings analysis agent, etc. Each one of those agents, 35 of them, come up with ideas. Then those agents debate.
Mm-hmm.
And they agree or disagree, and then they provide recommendations. Roughly think of this as generating consensus using your AI models. So it's a very interesting case example that's live and it's public. But I think we'll see more of this going forward, where you will have more than one type of system working on the same problem. We will also need, in my view, the equivalent of like an agent resources, like just as you have human resources. You'll need agent resources where you're constantly evaluating these agents and seeing if they're meeting muster. Are they meeting the KPI that you've set up for them? And then use or disuse agents that are working or not working for you respectively. So there's opportunity in that space as well, and we are learning, right? So this is net new technology for the world, and maybe a few of us are closer to it than others are, but in the next 6-12 months it'll become common lingo. ChatGPT was not common space 2 years back. Now it's very common. Reasoning models only appeared somewhere last year, and now we take them for granted. Deep research maybe 3 or 4 months back, and we're like, oh, deep research, we use it for everything now. So there's this very fast adoption at the consumer level and at, let's say, advanced users and how they're using these models. I also read a fascinating stat, Chris, that Cursor now generates 1 billion lines of code a day, and humanity collectively generates only a few billion lines of code every day.
Right.
So that's a substantial portion of code that's AI generated. So I think we'll see more and more of this as we go through it, and these AI agents will get better and better. And when you use more of them in concert, you could build that consensus.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways to build consensus too, and validators. Where I kind of cut my teeth was in blockchain, where we were looking at distributed ledger technology and how zero knowledge proofing could clear, could work effectively as a clearinghouse for decentralized exchange. Which brings us to my favorite part of this conversation. Usually, when we go deep around a fire pit, it's about cryptography and the persistence of money, and how money rolls through or pushes through or doesn't push through AI. Our current fiat currency struggles to live inside of agentic design, doesn't it? So what about cryptography? What about blockchain technology? And how do we move forward with different stablecoins and tokens?
Yeah, this is many have called this post-labor economics. So you're going into a world where essentially we have a new factor of production. I don't know if people have spoken about this adequately. I was doing some research on this idea. The factors of production are land, labor, capital, and enterprise. Enterprise being the last edition by J. Schumpeter. And now you have AI, which in my opinion is like a new factor of production. And the old network models that we have, systems of information, money is a system of information, those are kind of breaking based on how these new models are proliferating across the marketplace and having a little bit of a deflationary impact overall. So I would see, as we go forward, things like blockchain, things like decentralized DAOs, as they call decentralized autonomous organizations, these will become more prominent. Also, what we are seeing is very likely to see, and this is kind of prediction space across Gartner, across Gallup, World Economic Forum, is many more small organizations than we have had in the past. So you now have the ability to have a 10 to 25% company scale to $1 billion very quickly, and AI will enable that. And I call this the human plus machine unexplored space. So if I were to step back for a second, most of what we see, people think about as you have a circle of human work, and inside that circle of human work there is AI, and AI is growing and growing and growing and encroaching more and more upon human work, and eventually there'll be no work for human beings to do. I think there's a partial worldview, because there is a world of work outside of this circle of human work that exists presently, which is the human plus AI world. We have not explored that at all. We're just beginning to explore it. And as we explore this, we will have tremendous unlock. This is not an easy transition. And this transition will break old models, and new models will need to be birthed. And this includes how people interact with organizations, how organizations interact with each other, how we interact with the economy, how we are rewarded for the work that we do, how we measure success, productivity. Every single thing will need to be reimagined and rewired. This does not have to happen tomorrow, by the way. It could take a decade for this to happen. It could take more than that for it to happen. But this is the direction that we are going. Things will change, and they will change for the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I'm 24 years as an entrepreneur, so we have two assets under management right now that are agentic designed by default. So they're basically complete AI OS right from the very beginning. So it's going to be interesting to watch as this proliferates. Right now, they haven't generated a single dollar of revenue, but that's okay. They're in a lab, they're in a contained spot. They're simple use cases, simple customer profiles, massive total addressable market. But what we're doing basically is just taking a page from robotic process automation and creating, intelligent automation around every step of the way. Once we put the money in, that's where all of the systems will start to work. That'll become the data. The revenue will become the data. So we're building the systems that are the infrastructure, and this is the plumbing, so to speak, or the wiring, so to speak, that allows for that persistence to happen throughout the organization. But right now, there is not one single employee.
Yeah, yeah. It's also one of the topics that we get a lot of questions on. I'm sure, Chris, you do as well. Is copyright and creation and intellectual property. We should recognize that these ideas were generated in the world of the printing press and not in the world of AI. And one of the very interesting concepts that I learned at MIT was this notion of learn right laws as opposed to copyright laws. So learn right laws enable you to earn every time an AI model learns from your content, and every time somebody uses the content based on the AI model learning from your content. For that to be a reality, we need everything that we discussed with blockchain, crypto, and some type of decentralized organization, new forms of money, and so on and so forth. So this is, look, it's not an easy process. It's a societal transition. It may take decades. And if we want to get faster, we can. The power is in our hands. The greater our adoption, the faster we can progress, the better it is for all of us. And the adage is that the rising tide lifts all boats. And I see that applied when it comes to AI.
Yeah, one of the places that I love, that your book takes us is into that enlightened intelligence, AI for good, so to speak. And it's pretty easy to put a bunch of use cases together on how it can produce more money, more revenue, operational efficiency, absorb complexity. AI is going to be amazing at collecting the operational complexity of a business and simply giving results. One of the authors, Robert Heinlein, who's a science fiction writer, says that specialization is for insects. I don't know if you've So one of the things that I think I'm learning about the advent of AI is that it may also be the rise of the generalist. What do you think about that? You have a comment or something on LinkedIn that I saw that you made the comment that AI has the power of 1,000 PhDs in your pocket. So is this the rise of the generalist?
Yeah, I definitely I believe that you now have the power of 1,000 PhDs in your pocket. However, I like this notion that I think it was Andrei Karpathy who brought this idea called jagged intelligence, and Ethan Mollick's written about it as well. The jagged frontier of AI. The notion being that simultaneously AI can produce PhD level research papers, but not tell you how many R's in the word strawberry accurately, or think that 9.9 is greater than 9.10 or something like this. So it's a bit crazy in terms of how these AI models work. So how do you discern value from the AI models? That becomes a challenge. I think as we go forwards, you will see less error from the AI and greater accuracy, and we'll start to trust and believe more in what the AI produces. But that has an implication for human beings. So is that cognitive displacement? Is it cognitive enhancement or augmentation? So those become questions for us to consider. And I think that as we go forwards, we will have something like the equivalent of a director, as opposed to, let's say, a prompt engineer. A director is able to look at multiple different AI models, agents, and mix them as necessary for a certain task. An engineer is specialized in using one type of AI model, let's call it that. So I think you'll have proliferation of directors. And I think that it's also a rise of the new age polymath, where you'll have deep fields of expertise across multiple different areas. And you can use these AI to gain that level of expertise or fill the blanks for you. And if you're able to do that effectively, you suddenly become superhuman. And being superhuman in today's day and age, I think it is easy if you have AI. The only thing is, don't mistake the AI output for your own. So this is where do you draw the line? How much of this that you created is you? What is authentically you versus the voice of the AI? How do you retain your own voice, your own identity in the world where everybody sounds like Chat GPT with M dashes in their LinkedIn posts and so on and so forth? Like this is a very interesting space around identity awareness, and how where do you draw the line between yourself and AI?
Yeah, I experienced, so that's the matchmaker phase. As a person who has been tinkering inside of Azure AI Foundry with a few projects and a few hubs. And I thought I was doing well until Hugging Face 2 weeks ago released 10,000 more models.
Yes.
Because that's when I realized, okay, this really truly has gone exponential, where there's no way that I can match. That's
Yes.
beyond my human capacity to match 11,000, almost 12,000 models now. So to your point about pairing the right model with the right problem and giving it the right amount of context is no longer, I don't think, maybe a human process. Whereas
Yes.
before, when I started with Azure AI Foundry, there were maybe 700 models. Now there's maybe 12,000. So thank you, Hugging Face, for doing what you did in terms of
Incredible.
open source. It's an amazing give, an amazing hand forward. But that matchmaking phase now is over. I now officially need a machine to help me matchmake.
Yes, absolutely. I also think that this goes down the path of the third layer, right? So we had layer one being quality data, layer two being the models that you build on the data, and level three being the human beings using the models to create exponential outcomes. I think we're there where we can use these models to create exponential outcomes for ourselves. The challenge going forward is going to be that those models will keep changing. And Chris, to your point, there'll be new things added every single day. So you will definitely need an AI companion. The super simple way to think about this is there's something like 7 to 10,000 medical papers published every single day. How many has your doctor read?
Right.
Likely zero of them today, because I'm sure they're busy with patients.
Hopefully.
Right now, maybe the law says you cannot provide medical advice using AI. In 5 years' time, the law could say you cannot provide medical advice without using AI. And that's a very real shift. That shift has implications now. If you think about what we discussed on what does it mean for laws, what does it mean for copyright, what does it mean for regulation, compensation, monetary systems, rewards, recognition, performance, productivity, all of those things. So this is it's a very interesting phase of humanity. The next 10 years will see a century of innovation. The power of that innovation is in our hands.
Yeah, so we talked about infrastructure, and then we talked about composability and threw out some use cases. And the one thing that I think everybody has realized as a benefit of AI, whether you use it as the free model in ChatGPT as a search engine or whether you use it with complex RAG models, is that one of the values and benefits of AI is time. And a lot of people forget that a really smart guy named Einstein was working on the theory of relativity when he came across E equals mc squared, which we built our entire industrial revolution off of, the first one.
Yes.
But what he was working on was relativity, and relativity is space and time. So here we are, all recognizing and revaluing or requantifying the value of time, because you can get that answer from everybody. It automated deck. I got my grocery bill. I mean, my grocery list. I get all this time back. So we're moving feels like we're moving from cardinal to ordinal. We're moving into this space of time. We talk about that a minute. That's part of consciousness, is being aware of our time around us as well, right?
Time is the only truly scarce resource, right? And if we are able to suddenly unlock more time, now it begs the question: what will you do with that additional time?
That's right.
And it's not an easy question to answer. And one of our common friends, Dan Smolin, we were chatting, and one of the things I was thinking about is stage one is kind of digitization. So the productivity unlock from AI now develops slides for me. So previously I was spending 8 hours on a deck. Now it takes me 1 hour on that deck. And actually that 1 hour is much more strategic than aligning boxes or something. So therefore I've now unlocked 7 hours. This unlock is not digital transformation. This unlock is simply digitization. You had a process that a human being was doing, that you measured the human being on like you would measure a machine, the word being productivity, and you have designed KPI around it. And now the human being performs in 1 hour as opposed to 8 hours using AI. The equivalent is a middle schooler doing their math homework using AI. They're doing middle school math. If the middle schooler uses AI to do university level math, now that's a digital transformation event where Chris combined with AI can do work in a space that Chris aspired to do but could not do for want of some technical reason. I wanted to develop a website, but I could not because I'm not a HTML coder. I don't know Python. I don't know web development. So now I use Cursor and Replit, and now suddenly I have unlocked this ability. That, in my view, is transforming people's lives, and using AI, we can do that. Imagine the number of lives that you can lead now using AI. So previously your life was 9 to 5 accountant. Now your life could be 9 to 5 accountant, 9 to 5 web developer, 9 to 5 app developer, 9 to 5 novelist, so on and so forth. With VO3, 9 to 5 movie director. So it's incredible what you could unlock with this. And I think I'm a techno optimist, and I view this as the future with an optimistic lens. It's an amazing, amazing opportunity for all of us to explore things that we thought were not explored, not explorable in our lifetime.
Yeah, as long as we don't reinvest that time into more meetings. And I think
Yes.
that's what you'll hear on LinkedIn over and over again, is we're reinvesting our time into productivity, into more meetings.
There is this fantastic meme cartoon from the Marketunist, where he has this. We're doing a meeting, and there's one human being, and everything else is a bot that somebody has sent to the meeting. So if we have, I've said this on another discussion as well. If I use AI to write an email, and then Chris uses AI to summarize the email, and then Chris's AI writes an email to me, which I use AI to summarize. And the problem is not the AIs. The problem is that email. Get rid of the email. Let the AIs talk to each other, and you go do other things, better things.
Yeah. That's why I think I got stuck in that consensus layer for validation and verification, because there's going to be a lot of governance and there's going to be a lot of protocols that
Yes.
have to be sort of rewritten. We have to rethink kind of everything. Is it acceptable to send your AI to a meeting, or is that considered rude? Did Ram send Ram to me today? Are we doing this for real, like we started the conversation, or is this
No.
the Ram bot? And I
Yes.
don't even know that this is the Ram bot. And is that rude? Right now, it's certainly not illegal. It may not even be inappropriate. But you remember early when Otter AI came out, and all of a sudden, all of these recording mechanisms were coming into our video conference calls. And it's kind of like, I'm not sure I
Yes.
want that in here.
Yes.
Like, it's not because I have something to hide. It just feels invasive. So society is going to feed back a lot of this information, I think, and will ultimately reach this sort of general consensus around some of this, right?
Yeah. There are some interesting examples of what you described, right? So as an example, there's a company called Limitless. I don't know if you've heard of it. They produce a hardware piece called a pendant. So you can clip on the pendant to your person, and it basically records everything that you're saying. And now you have limitless memory, and it has the ability to record every conversation that you're having and record other people in the conversation as well. And they've applied a very smart technique to overcome the privacy issues on this, which is kind of our spinal reflex. But what about privacy, right? So the pendant requires vocal consent from every voice that it hears. to start recording the voice. And now, once it has that, you can have live transcription, you can have live translation, you don't have to ever make meeting room notes, so you can be more present, and so on and so forth. So this is an example. There are also interesting examples with the Meta AI glasses, right? You could have you basically are superhuman now. You know everybody on the street, and so on and so forth. So there are some interesting examples there. There's live translation, AI breaking the language barrier. There are also risks where people are using these glasses for interviews, on dates as well. So suddenly now you know everything about the person you're meeting, and there's this amazing chemistry, but it turns out it's AI. So is that real, or is that problem? So this again draws us back to what is us, and where do we draw that line between us and technology?
Yes. And that's where we go into the conscious machine and enlightened intelligence, which is why everybody needs to read this book, or at least continue to reference this book as you're thinking about building things. Because look, it's real easy. We're going to solve the simple problems first. We always do. And in many ways, Ram, and I know the simple problems have been solved in a lot of context. If squeezing more revenue or efficiency is the problem, the model's built.
Yes.
We can do that already. A lot of what is going to be generated in terms of conflicts or problems, that resolution with artificial intelligence is going to come through protocols and governance, and it's going to come through societal acceptance or societal rejection. And there's no question that there are plenty of people in the world that are willing to become the machine with wearables, with implants, Aura rings, wearables, watches for hearts, and all that information. Digital monitor, record, and validate is happening, where people wake up
Yes.
and they're allowed that monitor, record, and validate. So we're recording the world. What we do with that data is entirely up to us.
Absolutely, right. The value with AI, and I've seen this. I have this Whoop strap on me, and the moment Whoop integrated generative AI into the Whoop interface, it's become exponentially better. Because now I can talk to 4 years of data that I have on the Whoop, and the generative AI produces simple to read instructions, and it says, okay, here's how this is today's weather. Here's what I see from your historic performance. These are the activities that you typically do on a Tuesday or something. And here's what I recommend you do. And you take it or leave it, but it's a valuable data point. And now they're even able to detect things like blood pressure and things like this from your wrist, which is incredible. No one would have thought this possible 10 years back, and here we are.
Yeah, one of my closest friends, Rex Miller, is a huge fan of Whoop and Aura and uses both. And he is a very active and healthy guy. So and he's also a very busy guy, between being on stage and doing roundtables and doing podcasts and bringing people to his ranch. He's all over the place. So he loves to be able to
Yes.
see sort of where his stasis is and how well he's rested. And that's helpful to him. But then I have a client who's a medical professional who thinks that it's anxiety inducing. Because to the wrong person that knows that information, it is anxiety producing.
Yes.
If your metrics are good, it's incredibly helpful and incredibly useful. If your
Yes.
metrics are bad, it's terrifying and it is anxiety inducing. So again, protocols, governance, acceptance, you don't have to have one. You don't have to wear one. That choice is really important. And I think that that's really where we're starting to go as we move along this adoption curve into artificial intelligence and move closer to singularity, if you want to call it that. You don't have to participate in this. We can cut all this off and go out into the woods. It's totally okay.
Yes.
Now, what that does for you is probably double-sided, just like every other decision.
It's also interesting, and my mind goes to a place which is, call it semi-philosophical. Like if we the old adages are no longer true. So seeing is believing is what we said. Now seeing is no longer believing. Similarly, don't get into cars with a stranger, probably still true. But all of us do, right, with Uber. And pretty soon you're going to get into a car where there's no driver. And for those of us who have been on a Waymo ride, we know that is true. And the Waymo is as good or bad as a human driver. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Similarly, we have previously said we cannot change that we cannot measure. So if you measure something, you can now how to change it. I think that changes to, if you can measure it, you can automate it. And therefore, value should be placed on things that you cannot measure. Not don't measure, but you cannot measure. So things like empathy, compassion, creativity, nuance, taste, experience, authenticity, these kind of things you cannot measure. And because you cannot measure them, I don't think they'll ever be automated. And because they can't be automated, now they become magnitudes more valuable.
That's a great place to stop. I do have to ask you a closing question. I'll give you 3 adjectives. I want you to share with me one that you think you most identify with. Do you consider yourself or most identify with yourself as a maverick, a maestro, or a misfit?
Ooh, interesting one. In the context of what we discussed, like director of multiple AI systems and tools and the human machine spectrum, maestro.
Yeah, I think it's okay. So I'll share with you why I do that. One, that's how I index because I think we're going to have very interesting discussions around pooling all the folks that I've had the pleasure of interviewing, having podcast conversations with. When I pull all the maestros together, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. When I pull all the mavericks together, I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. When I pull all of the misfits together, that's just going to be a big party. So we'll probably bring everybody along for the ride. But Ram, thank you for sharing the space with me today. We are pretty much dead on an hour, and I think that the folks who listen to us appreciate that we're timely. Thank you for your time. Any way, anywhere we can sort of memorialize your book, your website, any of that information that we want to put in here in addition to the show notes?
No, I think awesome. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for everyone who listened. I am very active on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. I publish quite frequently on my blog as well, at least once weekly. These days, sometimes more, given the pace of change. ramsrinivasan.com. I'm reachable on either platforms.
Well, Ram, thank you again for sharing the space with us. We appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.